Hi guys, it's Ari. I'm your instructor today, and I'm going to give you a lesson on how to improve on your food photography. If you don't already know, I'm a local food and portrait photographer. You can find some of my work in Spokane Coeur d'Alene Living Magazine, sometimes the Inlander, sometimes Spokesman Review, but also more prominently, you can find my work in Edible Inland Northwest magazine. It's a brand new one. I'm actually the photo editor for Edible Inland Northwest starting this year, so that's very exciting. But in my capacity as food photographer, I've learned a lot of ways to improve how you can showcase your food in a more beautiful way. So I'm going to share some of those tricks and tips with you today. And one of the ways I'm going to show you some of the things that I'm telling you about today in our lesson is we're going to try to do a shoot together using a very simple thing that you probably all have in your pantry, and that's a PB&J sandwich. So we're going to make PB&J sandwich and try to photograph it, showing you some of the tips and tricks that I talk about, okay? So food photography, for the most part, falls under the genre of still life photography, right? You arrange things on a table, you light them properly, you style them, and then you shoot. Of course, with the exception for food photography is when you're incorporating action into the shots. Things like a hand reaching in to get a scoop of cereal, a hand pouring syrup over pancakes, or a whole bunch of hands getting food from the middle of the table when people are dining together. So that's incorporating motion into food photography. That's what makes food photography different and its own little genre, right? So food photography is fun because it incorporates a lot of color and action, but really the goal in food photography is you want your photo to be so appealing to the eye that your viewer wants to reach in and eat it. Like, that's really the goal of food photography. So you want the colors to be vibrant, you want them to be very appealing, and you want the food to taste like you can almost taste it just by looking at it. So today I'm going to discuss with you about 5 tips that I've found to be very helpful in improving your food photography and making your food photos look more appealing to the eye. So tip number 1, just like in all photography, the most important determinant to whether or not your photos come out beautiful or just mediocre is light. And in food photography, we need to discuss the 2 things about light that matter to food photography. And one is quality of light, and the second thing is directionality of light. So quality of light refers to harshness or softness of light. Harsh light is something like sun directly shining onto your food from a window, or a bright light in a restaurant directly shining overhead onto your food. Harsh light usually produces very deep shadows and very blown highlights. And usually the food photo that comes out of harsh light is very dramatic and maybe even a little bit too dramatic and not very appealing. On the other hand, the second kind of light that we really love for food photography would be diffuse light. And that's light that comes in, but then it also gets diffused by a semi-transparent white object like a diffuser, or even clouds. Like right now, today is a very cloudy day, so the light coming in from the window is very soft and it's very attractive. If you try to photograph food against this kind of light, a lot of the shadows and the highlights are very balanced with each other, and the photo comes out a little bit more even and more beautiful, more appealing to the eye. The second thing about light we want to discuss today is the directionality of light. Directional light is the kind of light that comes exclusively or mostly exclusively from one direction. There are 3 main directions, right, that we are going to discuss today. The first one is backlight, and that's when the light is illuminating your food from the back. Now, lighting food from the back is a little bit more dramatic. It produces darker shadows and more overblown highlights. It produces the halo effect, which is quite attractive if you're trying to showcase intricate texture and food garnishes, as well as other interesting details on your plates. So for instance, if you're trying to illuminate frosting on a cupcake, when you backlight it, it showcases more of the intricate patterns that you made with your frosting design, and also illuminates the shine and makes it a little bit more dramatic, so you can see a lot more of that texture that was created on top of the cupcake when you backlight it. Backlighting is also a great way to photograph foods that are normally flat, things like casseroles, where there is a lot of texture on top. Bread puddings, right? There's a lot of texture on top, but it's a very flat food otherwise. If you backlight that, you are showcasing more of the textures and all of the things that are happening on the top. And you'll see that more with backlighting in a more dramatic fashion than with any other kind of lighting. Side lighting works too, obviously, but backlighting just gives you a little bit more of the factor with flat foods. But because it's dramatic, you have to also know how to modify it. So backlighting will work sometimes for food photography, but a lot of times there's a lot more other things that you have to do to it. And then the second one is front light. Front light is probably the least appealing way to light your food photos. And that's because your light is coming in from the front. It's usually very flat. It flattens your image. There's no dimensionality to it. Of course, everything is lit and everything is seen, but it's very two-dimensional and really just flat and unattractive and boring. So that's front light. The third, and probably the most, the one that I use the most as a food photographer, is side lighting. And side lighting is when your light comes from either the left side of your image or the right side of your image. In general, side light is one of the best ways to light food because it illuminates the subject in a very pleasing and very balanced way. It's pretty universally flattering to any kind of food photography. So it's a great default option when you're starting out. Particularly, it's useful if you're photographing food with some height, like a stack of pancakes or tall drinks or burger with lots of toppings, things like that, because side light illuminates every single element of your photo pretty evenly. So as an aside, I've been asked this question before, which side do you illuminate your food photos? Which is the better side, more attractive side? One thing I've found is that it seems to correlate with the way we read text. For example, for people that read text from left to right, like I do, it seems to me that food that is illuminated from the left side look more attractive to me than foods that are illuminated from the right side. I don't know. That's just something just a personal thing that I've observed. So maybe it correlates with the fact that I read my text from left to right. So maybe that's something that's really cool. It's a really cool correlation. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. So maybe some of you guys can tell me which ones look more attractive to you. So the second tip I have for you today is you have to learn how to manage light. Managing light is simply learning how the light falls on your subject and learning how to deal with and how to shape that around your subject. So it's easier to illustrate this point of managing light in relation to backlit images, right? Because when something is backlit, you've got that strong light coming in from the back, very overblown highlights and also very dark shadows. So how do you deal with something like that? When light is coming in a little bit too strongly, one of the ways that you can manage that light is by diffusing it. Diffusing it is simply, putting something that's semi-transparent, that's usually white, like a cloud, or like a diffuser that you can buy from Amazon or any camera store, one of those pop-up car thingies, right? You put that against your light source, and something that would otherwise hit your subject in a very dramatic fashion, just a little bit too harsh and directly, will disperse. It will disperse the light everywhere and make everything fall on your subject a little bit more balanced. The second thing that you can do to manage light that's backlit is to reflect. So you're diffusing and reflecting. So when a light comes in from the back and you've got the very pronounced dark shadows, you want to reflect some of that light back onto your subject to lessen the shadows and to just make them a little bit more balanced with the highlights. To reflect something, you can either use a white well, in food photography, it's best to use a white object like a poster board or a white reflector. Usually if you're reflecting with one of those very shiny reflectors, it then makes the light that's reflecting back on your food a little bit too harsh. So then you're dealing with now direct light again. So we don't generally reflect light back onto the food with one of those shiny reflectors. So when you're using a white reflector, the closer you are to the food that you're reflecting the light onto, the brighter the reflection becomes. And the farther you are away, the smaller the reflection becomes. So that's all an artistic decision that you have to make. Also, the bigger the reflector, the more light is being reflected back. And then the smaller the reflector, the less light is being reflected back. Another way to manage your light is to use a black card to add shadow. Sometimes there's a little bit too much light coming in, even if it's one direction. Like if it's a very big window, there's a little bit too much light coming in that it almost renders your food looking flatter than you would like. So you use, for me, I would use a black card or a black poster board to take some of that light off that's coming into the object and make it a shadow. So a black card does the opposite of a white card in that it absorbs light, so then less light falls back into your subject, and then it renders it as a shadow. So for someone like me, managing light is very important, in particular when I am tasked with photographing food in a restaurant when they have service going on. Obviously, that's not the case right now because of COVID. But usually when I come into a restaurant, there's customers there too, and the chef is going back and forth in the kitchen serving the guests. So they would put me somewhere in a corner table with a little window, and I have to deal with the limited space and resources that I have there with me. And I'm not necessarily I don't necessarily want to bust out the giant strobe lights and umbrellas and whatnots with all the tripods, etc., because then that'll be intrusive to the restaurant service. So managing light with just a reflector, like a little simple white poster board or a diffuser or a black card, knowing how to work those to shape the light that's hitting my images will determine whether or not those images are something that would be attractive to the eyes of whoever's going to purchase them, or the magazine that's going to publish them, or myself, or if they're just going to be flat and blah and waste my time. So anyways, managing light is very important. And along the same lines as managing light, if you have too much light, even if it's one direction, coming from one direction, you have to know how to block it in certain ways so that the source of light that's hitting your image is something that's a little bit more controlled. And to do that, you can do simple things like bring 2 black cards to block light, or curtains, or little white sheets to diffuse. Lots of little tricks like that to limit the light that's hitting your object so that it's not too much, that it flattens out your image. So the third tip I have for you is you have to know the shooting angles that would produce the best results in your food photography. There are 3 main shooting angles in food photography. The first one is called the straight on view. That's when your camera is looking straight at the food, same height, same everything, basically parallel to the food surface, right? Straight on view is very important when you're shooting something that has height, things that are stacked on top of each other, like cookies or breads or pancakes. When you're shooting that and you want to showcase the height of what you're shooting, then you want to shoot it straight on. The second view is what a lot of people now call the flat lay view, right? Is when you're shooting right directly above your image. Basically, you're shooting perpendicular, you're looking perpendicular to the food surface. When you're shooting that way, a lot of times the purpose for that is because you're trying to showcase everything, all the components that are on the table. A lot of times people do that when they're shooting recipe parts. So when you're making bread, for example, and you want to show the flour and the sourdough starter and all of the little elements that are included in making bread, you shoot it from the top. And when you're shooting that way, you are able to tell a story of what's going on. That's a really ideal way of shooting magazine covers. One of my favorite magazine covers is this guy right here, and it's a coffee shoot. So, you shoot the beans and the ground coffee and then the final product, which is the coffee. So it tells the story of the elements that make up a latte and kind of like a little history of, start here and then you end up with this. So flat lay shooting is ideal when you also want to style the elements of your photograph. When you're flat lay shooting, you have to pay attention to your backdrop. You have to pay attention to the ingredients that are around your food and how they play with all of the elements of your photograph. It's a really fun angle to shoot at, and it's probably one of my favorite ones. The third angle that I'm going to discuss is probably the most popular angle that we use in food photography, and that is the 30 to 45 degree angle, depending on your height. Basically, that is a very popular food photography angle because when you're eating in a normal eating way, you're sitting down and looking at your food in that angle. So that is one of the most popular ways to shoot food because that is kind of like people say the 50 millimeter lens is how we see people normally, right? The angle of 30 to 45 degrees of looking at food is the angle at which we normally see our food when we're eating. So that's one of the more popular ways to photograph food. That angle of shooting food is helpful when you're trying to showcase a hero element. So one food or one part of your photo is the main thing, and then the rest of them are just like supporting characters. So, for example, if I'm shooting a drink like a margarita, I would shoot that in a 30 to 40 angle with the elements of the margarita in the background kind of blurred out. So you'll see the margarita in the front nice and sharp, and then you'll see the wedges of lime in the front and the tequila and all the other things that I used to put in the margarita in the background. So that's one of the ways to showcase a photo like that, is to shoot it at an angle. The fourth tip I have for you in improving your food photography is you have to keep your colors cohesive. This is basically going back to what I said in the beginning, is kind of belongs in the same genre as still life photography, right? So in still life photography, you're very much aware of how the colors play against each other. And if something's amiss, it just makes the image, it throws it off and it makes it look unattractive. Colors do that. If your colors are clashing with each other, when you look at a food, no matter how beautifully styled it is and how beautifully shot it is with all the right angles and all of the compositional elements intact, if the colors are off because they clash with each other, then the image is bad. It's not as great of an image as if the colors are cohesive and they work together very well. And one of the ways to do that is to learn a little bit about color theory. When you know about color theory, you know things like how primary colors interact with the secondary colors, right? So when I'm shooting food, a lot of times I'm very cognizant of complementary colors. So reds with greens, oranges with blues, yellows with purples. Really, if you know that basic one about color theory, about just kind of trying to match and keep together the complementary colors, then you're on the right track as far as learning how to deal with managing the color balance, the balance of artistic elements of your image. So just like in all photography, one of the things, one of the most important things that we want to know how to do very well is to master our exposure. In food photography, it's very important that your food is nice and sharp and it's not as grainy, right? Especially if you're submitting it for a publication to a magazine, or if you are submitting it for a blog or publishing it in your own blog. You don't want your food photos to be grainy. And what determines grain in your food photography? It's ISO. So we want to have our ISO as low as we possibly could get away with. And if you're in a dark room and you're trying to manage the light that's hitting your object or the light that's being captured by your camera, a lot of times we do not want to compromise ISO by increasing it too much. So then we fiddle with aperture and shutter speed. Now with aperture, when you're trying to showcase the elements of food in your photograph, you want the main subject to be in complete focus, right? And if you go too low in your f-stop, which means wider aperture, then you might lose some of the elements of the main subject that you are trying to showcase. So in general, in food photography, aperture, we want to stick with probably 4.5 to 8 or 11, especially if you're shooting flat lay, so top down shooting. When everything's flat, you want all of the elements to be in focus, unless you're trying to be artistic and obviously want to blur out some elements to make it look more abstract, etc. Then you have some artistic control that way to lower the f-stop. But in general, f4.5 to f8, f4.5 to f8 is what I stick with when I'm photographing food for aperture. So really the one thing that we want to control the most in the three main exposure things, right? Aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, is shutter speed. That's the one we probably have more leeway in controlling when we're trying to manage how much light is entering our camera. And shutter speed is limited by if you are hand-holding your camera when you're photographing, or if you have your camera on a tripod. So you can get away with up to probably 1/100th of a second or 1/80th of a second shutter speed when you're hand holding without blurring things too much. But otherwise, to have a tack sharp image when you're in a dark room and you're stuck with, you're trying to have ISO 400 and then you're trying to have an aperture of, f4.5, and then that basically is forcing you to have a shutter speed that's like 1/30th of a second. You have to have a tripod when that's the case. Otherwise you'll have, no matter what you think, you brace yourself into a wall or a chair, a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second will still produce a little bit of a motion blur. So it's very important to have a tripod with you when you're photographing food in a dark space or in a space where you really are forced to control the shutter speed. The last tip that I'm going to talk to you guys about is composition. Composition is very important in food photography because when you are presenting your image to a publication or to a blog, then you want the editor to be able to place your image in an attractive way on whatever they're publishing it on, right? Composition is just also important in general because it is what differentiates a mediocre image from a very beautiful, eye-catching image. And the two compositional techniques we employ when I do food photographs is, one is the rule of thirds, and the second one is the S-curve. The rule of thirds is when you divide your image into a grid, a 3x3 grid, and you place the hero elements or the main elements of your photograph in the intersection of those lines in the middle. Like there's a square in the middle where all those lines intersect, and all the dots, the 4 dots that contain that square are where you put your main elements of your photograph. Usually that results in a more appealing, eye-catching image than if you didn't do that. Some people break that rule, but in general, that's a more attractive way to compose. Thing is the S-curve. The S-curve is really cool in when you are arranging the elements of your photograph, even when some of the elements are blurred out in the background, if you arrange it in an S curve, you're forcing the eyes to sweep across the page in an S kind of way, and that seems to be to have a very appealing effect to the viewer. So next time you're arranging things, the best way to practice this is to arrange a flat lay and to arrange the elements in a flat lay kind of in an S curve kind of way, so that there's an S shape that is formed by some of the of the photograph. And if you do that, many different ways obviously, but if you do that, I guarantee you that when you arrange it with the S curve or the rule of thirds, you'll have a more pleasing image. Okay, so I'm to go make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich really quick, and we're going to prep it.
Can you hear me while the video is playing?
Yes.
I can.
Okay. Okay. So here I put my camera on a tripod above me, and I was just trying to arrange it, but my lens on here was a 50mm, so I had to switch over really quick to a little bit of a wider angle so I could get more of the scene.
Because I'm limited right now with the fact that this camera has a 50mm lens right on it.
That's what I just said.
But, you know, if we're trying to kind of compose this image, we probably, you know, try to employ, or maybe that ball's too much. Right. A little bit of the S curve. A little bit of an S curve composition right there. Really cool. Right, you can bring in some of the strawberries inside a little bit, like so. Crop it right in camera. Just playing with it right now. I'm going to reshoot this with a better lens setup, but this is just kind of showing you a little bit of how I plan out a flat lay. So I think it needs a little bit more elements right here and maybe on the top, but I'm going to show you some examples next of 45 degrees and also a straight on shoot.
Okay, so this is the resulting image of the flat lay of the peanut butter and jelly. And then here's the straight on shot of it. And then the next one is the 30 to 45 degree angle. And I had to switch the breads. So that's the end of my lecture. If you have any questions, I am going to stop the share really quick. There you go. Did everybody hear it?
Yeah, I heard it just fine.
Okay, good.
Yes, I heard it.
Perfect. So does anybody have any questions?
I see a few in the chat there.
Oh, okay. Let me go see. How do I know when I use black reflector or white reflector when doing a project? Does it just depend on the strength of the light? This is from Bethany. Yes, it depends on the strength of the light, and also it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're shooting, a very good example of something that you shoot and have to figure out if you want to use the black absorber or the white reflector is if you're shooting an egg, right? When you're shooting an egg, it's completely white. And if you're shooting that against a white surface, like a white plate or a white backdrop, to give the egg more dimension, if it's really bright already, then you add a black card to put a little bit of shadow around it. So that's one of the examples I have for using the black card. And then, are you saying flat lay when you are shooting straight down? Correct. Because that's what they call it. I actually learned that on Instagram when people say, you know, flat lay design or flat lay things, they're styling things on top of a table and they're shooting down. So I say flat lay and shooting down straight down interchangeably. Let's see. Do you have more peanut butter sandwich pics? I wish I did, but then the clouds came in and then I was trying to edit this video. Let's see. The best bread. Oh, okay. That's the bread that I use. Grandma Sycamore. Bethany, what is the equipment you use and where did you get it? Like the granite slab backdrop. So I now hoard things. You can get them anywhere from like Home Goods is a good place, thrift stores. I was fortunate enough that one of the local food photographers is moving to Hawaii. And so she called me and she asked if I wanted some of her stuff. And I said, can I have all of your stuff? So she basically, I inherited a lot of the stuff. The granite slab is from her. So that was really fortunate that I was able to get a granite slab. I don't know where she got it. Are there ways to make the food look better? Water, glue, freezing. Yes, that's actually, I mean, there's content for a whole nother lecture on styling food. When I go to a restaurant, I have a basket of goodies that I bring with me. And one of the things in that basket of goodies is a spray bottle of water. So when you're shooting like a fruit, and you want it to look more appealing, you just spritz the water on it and it looks like condensations. It looks like you just washed it and it attracts light better and it makes the fruit look more appealing. The other thing is I have a paintbrush and some oil, like olive oil. Usually I would paint that over things to make them shinier. So when you make the food shinier in general, it makes it more attractive, right? So I would brush that over a burger, like a burger patty. The way that it is when you order a burger, it just looks pretty drab. But if you brush that with oil, then all of a sudden you want to eat it from a picture. So there are little tips and tricks like that I do. The other thing is museum putty, kind of like Play-Doh. You bring that to prop things up so they look better because otherwise they're too flat. So like the peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was straight on that I shot, I had to prop that with another piece of bread at the bottom. That's a little tiny piece of bread. So it just kind of pops it up a little bit and it makes it look taller and it makes it look better. Let's see. From Cheryl, is a 15 to 30 millimeter a good lens for food? Not really, because that's pretty wide. I think for food, you want from 50 millimeter and up. And because you're trying to zoom into something, it's almost macro. You're almost shooting, when you're shooting food, you're shooting an object. So when you're shooting, you're not, unless you're shooting a restaurant full of people eating, then you want a wider lens for that. But a lot of times I find that 50 millimeters and above is what I usually go to. I actually use my 100 millimeter lens, my 100 millimeter macro lens the most with food photography. Do you usually use window light when you can? Yes, 100%, absolutely. It's just the most natural way to light food. When I have to shoot food at night, I have this studio light that's stable light. It's not a strobe light, so then it's just a stationary modeling light. It's what Godox modeling light with a big reflector to simulate a window, and that's what I use when I shoot at night. Any other questions?
Do you have any pictures handy on your computer there to share the screen? I know I didn't ask you to prepare that, but you
for
know, some of your other food photography that you didn't include, or behind the scenes.
No, Lucas took a lot of the behind the scenes, but they're all on my phone. when I shoot and someone's there with me, they usually shoot a behind the scenes picture of me with their phone. And you can see in some of the cases, I'm standing up of the table, shooting down. Not very sanitary, but we sanitize right after. So. Yes, any other questions?
Where else can we see your food photography?
I try to put a lot of them on Instagram. I'm going to try to add them to my website. I'm going to have a food photography drop down on my website because my Amen Photography website is portrait photography, but I'm going to add my food stuff on there. Right now you can find them on the magazines, basically.
So your website is amenphotography.com?
Yes, amen, sister. Amenphotography.com. Oh, editing photos in Photoshop, processing steps. See, that's thanks, Tamara. Presentation was fantastic. Thank you. So that's a whole nother lecture, processing in Lightroom and Photoshop. So there are two things that I would like for you to find on Lightroom is you actually, do you guys know how to find the compositional elements of Lightroom when you're cropping? So when you go to the crop function of Lightroom, if you click, there is a button that you can click there that'll show you the grid. The grid will show up for the rule of thirds, and then a whole bunch of other grids can show up there for composition. That's a whole lecture that's like 10 minutes long. But the other thing is saturation versus vibrance, right? What is the difference between those two things? And what is more useful for food photography, saturation or vibrance? I found that vibrance is a little bit more important than saturation because it only chooses the warm colors to include more saturation to them, whereas saturation ups the color of the whole image. And then that renders your image a little bit too much color-wise. But learn to find your the separators in Lightroom, where you can separate the, when you can adjust the reds from the greens. One of the more important things that I found in editing my food photos is increasing the saturation of greens and decreasing the yellows a little bit and increasing the reds. So that's a whole other.
So you increase the reds and the greens and decrease the yellow?
Yeah, the yellow because a lot of time the yellow that's rendered on your food is from the light in the restaurant. Because sometimes you don't have control over the light, the light that's the overhead lighting in the restaurant. So I decrease the yellow to take some of that. So if you're photographing bread, like a burger, usually the bread is very yellow in a restaurant because of the ambient light. But the greens are very important to increase the saturation of the greens. It helps to pop image for some reason.
Ari, do you have any tips for capturing steam or smoke?
Yes, so that's where the shutter speed comes into play, right? When you're photographing something with steam, you want to photograph it backlit against a black backdrop. So you find a black wall, or you put your black card behind it, or you find something that's darker than the steam. And hopefully that darker backdrop is lit from behind too. So like if you have a wall and there's a window, I put my black backdrop or darker backdrop against the window, kind of right below the light. So the light is still illuminating my image from the back, but a little bit from the top back. Then the steam comes up and you can see it very clearly when that's the case.
Okay, so it's like the light is like at a 45-degree angle or something?
Yeah, but from the top back.
Okay.
Yeah, from the top, but from the back. Yeah, and that's why backlighting is important, because it brings out elements like steam. Any other questions? I did if you go on my Instagram, Joyful Meandering, I did a series of photos that were themed, Hamilton themed, and those were a lot of fun. So each food was named after something from Hamilton, the musical. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Hamilton. That was a lot of fun for my kids, but that was a lot of fun to practice on. So I encourage you to do, just like you do themed photo projects for Camera Club, do themed projects with food and then photograph them.
Another
My
couple examples.
publisher actually, huh?
Give us
What'd
another
you say?
couple examples of food themes.
Food themes, red foods. So you can just say red foods and then, take a picture of everything that's red. Actually, as an aside, my publisher at Edible Inland Northwest said, after this class, I would like to encourage you guys, if you have a photograph that you'd like to submit to me after this class to show me what you've learned, we might be able to publish some of them. It's not a joke. He was actually very serious. So
When's the deadline?
January 21st.
21st. Okay.
Yeah. So this is for the February issue. And the issue in February is all about cultural food in Spokane. So there's your little.
Okay.
Yeah, tell us about your Immigrant Chef series and where that can be seen.
Oh yes, so Joyful Meandering is at joyful.meandering is my Instagram. One of the things that I'm doing just as a way to encourage people to eat out and choose the local small businesses in town is I try to feature some of the local chefs who are immigrants, and I interview them, I take pictures of them, and I take pictures of their food, and then I talk about their story on my Instagram. So you can find some of those stories. Unfortunately, one of them passed away from COVID recently, the Taqueria Fiesta Brava guy. But his daughter is now in charge of the restaurant, so that's really cool. But yeah, so I get to interview, I don't know if you guys know Fairy's Catering, Fairy Hagigi. So she's Persian, she's from Iran. Tomorrow I get to interview her via Zoom, and on Friday she's going to make me some Persian food to photograph, and I'm gonna pick it up curbside, and I'm gonna take it home and employ a lot of the things that I just talked to you guys about to take pictures of Persian food. So it'll be really fun.
And those will be on your Joyful Meandering eventually?
Yes. Well, they'll get published on Edible Inland Northwest, and then whatever doesn't get published, I put on my Instagram, because there's some like rights or whatever that we have to. I can't put it on my Instagram if it's published.
Can I share my screen to show your
Yes.
Joyful Meandering?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay, can you guys see it? What can you see?
Dorothy.
Yeah,
Yes.
I see gray.
You
I see gray.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What happened?
It says Dorothy's.
There you go.
Dorothy.
Oh, there you go. See some of my.
So
Someone made me a toilet paper cake.
toilet paper cake. Okay.
Yeah. That I had to style because it was so pretty. Oh, here's the Hamilton stuff.
Okay,
yes.
hold on. Which
great.
one? Which one's the Hamilton?
The star sandwiches on the upper left.
Oh,
Dennis.
okay. That one?
Yeah, so these are all Hamilton inspired.
Hamilton theme. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually named them. I forgot what I named the foods, but I wrote some funny names. Punny names.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's an example right there of the guy. He's an immigrant chef.
This one here?
Right there. So some of the photos on here are photos that I took with my phone, so not those up. Yeah, but you'll kind of see which ones are. Yeah, and there's another immigrant chef. So there's Fairy in the middle right here.
This is Fairy?
I get to interview her tomorrow.
And she's the one making the Persian food, you say?
Yes. If
Okay.
you haven't tried her yet, she's actually located on the South Hill, kind of on 5th Street near St. Luke's Hospital.
They have
Okay.
great stuff.
Yeah. Amazing. She has amazing story. Amazing story. Everybody, they all have amazing stories, and it's really cool to get to know these people and be able to interview them and learn about their story.
Okay.
But it also, food photography encourages you to play with your food. So, food nicely, and it makes it more appealing, but also more exciting to eat.
We get to practice 3 times a day if we want.
Oh,
Are you familiar with this Feast World Kitchen?
yes, I'm very good friends with them.
For the
I
immigrant
used to-
chefs, so
Nice.
since they have the different foods every day,
Yes.
all
Yes, yes.
weekend.
And then so here's right now, right there, Brittany and I, the one in the middle, sorry, Spokane Coeur d'Alene Living. The one
This
right
one here?
above that.
This one
No,
here?
no, go above that. Above that.
This
Go
one?
up one higher. Go one up. One more.
One more?
Yeah, more.
One
So
more?
the picture, yeah, right there. So in the middle right now, you'll see that's me and she's a local baker, Brittany. And what we did was
Right
for
in the
one
middle
whole-
are your boys.
oh yeah, no, scroll down, Dennis. Two more. Scroll down.
This one.
Nope, one more. The one where there's 2 ladies. That
This
one.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Brittany Cullen. She's a local baker. And what we did one year was 2 years ago is we took produce from Green Bluff, and she would make something out of the produce from Green Bluff, and I would photograph it. So every time a new produce is in season, so we went through strawberries, cherries, raspberries, everything that came out of Green Bluff. She made something and I photographed it. And that's kind of how, it helped me hone my skills, and it helped her hone her skills. And it was a great collaboration that we did together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And some of that stuff is in Spokane Coeur d'Alene Living magazine.
This is,
Thank you, Ari.
You're
Anybody else have
welcome.
last
I hope
question?
you guys learned something.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did.
Like
Thank
a
you.
Yeah,
Very
Thank you so much.
Very
did.
good.
Thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you
much.
for having me. This was very exciting.
And thank you, you Utah Club people, for joining us, and any other clubs that I invited. It was very nice to be able to share.
Yes.
Yeah, we learned a lot.
and thank
Thank
you. Ari.
you.
yes.
So if you have more ideas for Ari to teach us, she's very versatile. Let me know.
So now how are you going to keep us out of the kitchen while we're still confined to home?
Well, one of the things that I took up over the quarantine period was sourdough baking. I don't know how many of you did that too, but I became very good friends with our local bakers because I needed tips.
Oh, boy.
So yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to stay away from food when you're photographing it.
I bet. Fun.
So yeah,
Thanks.
thanks everyone. Thank you for having me. It
Yeah,
was really
thanks a lot.
exciting.
What's the, yeah. Thanks,
Thank
Ari.
you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch if we have more workshops that we can invite y'all to. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Bye.
Thanks, Lynn.
Right.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.